Well, welcome to Whole Bible Study with your host, me, Tad Inoue. As we settle in today, let me give a brief reminder for those who might be new here. A couple of sessions back, I mentioned that the live readings of Scripture have been moved to their new home, or they're really their own home. That space is called Bible Building with Tad Podcast. It's a companion project, short and focused, featuring just the readings themselves along with a brief summary. The idea is simple, to give you a give you a place where you can set aside sacred time, a rhythm of listening that becomes a part of your spiritual life, allowing the words of the Bible to flow over you without interruption. Many people use it as a way to mark out holy space in their week, creating a kind of liturgy for themselves. You'll find it in its own playlist right here on this channel. What we're doing here in Whole Bible Study is something a little different, but meant to complement it. This is the deep dive where we slow down and unpack the layers of history, anthropology, language, rabbinic interpretation, and theology. Together, these two streams, hearing the Word and exploring the Word, are meant to give us a fuller encounter with Scripture. Now, we step into Leviticus chapters 21 and 22. These are texts about priestly holiness, the special boundaries given to the descendants of Aaron. At first reading, they may sound like rigid restrictions, rules about mourning, marriage, and physical wholeness. But beneath them is a vision of a world where holiness is not just a private virtue, but a cosmic reality. To understand this, we need to enter the mindset of ancient Israel, where the priest was not only a ritual functionary, but a living symbol of the boundary between heaven and earth, a figure who stood at the threshold where the divine presence meets human community. The priests are told not to defile themselves with death. In Hebrew, the word is tama, or tame, meaning ritually impure or unclean. Death itself is not a moral failure, but it does represent the unraveling of life, a return to chaos. In biblical imagination, especially in Leviticus, God is the source and sustainer of life. Therefore, contact with death, even the natural death of a loved one, pulls the priest out of that holy space of life and vitality. Jacob Milgrom, one of the foremost scholars of Leviticus, explains that the priest's role is to uphold the integrity of the sanctuary, a space where death cannot intrude because it is wholly devoted to the God of life. The priest then becomes not only a teacher of or officiant, but a kind of liturgical embodiment of life overcoming death. Exceptions are made. Priests may defile themselves for close family, for parents, siblings, children, but even here, the boundaries are tight. This is not about denying grief, but about protecting sacred space. The marriage laws for priests carry this theme forward. Priests are forbidden from marrying a prostitute or a divorced woman, and the high priest is commanded to marry only a virgin from among his own people. Now, at first glance, this seems restrictive or even harsh, but again, it reflects a symbolic system. Rashi, the medieval French rabbi and commentator, explained that these rules were designed to guard the integrity of the priestly lineage. The priest represented not himself, but a sacred order passed down through generations. Other rabbinic sources saw these laws as metaphorical as well. The priest, as a representative of the people, must remain faithful and pure, just as Israel is called to remain faithful to God. In Midrashic tradition, Israel is frequently described as a bride and God as the bridegroom, a covenantal union sealed at Sinai. These priestly restrictions then mirror the deeper spiritual fidelity expected of the entire nation. Now later Christian theology would pick up on this image, describing the church as the bride of Christ. But it is rooted first in Hebrew scriptures and in Jewish interpretive traditions. Perhaps the most challenging section for modern readers concerns the physical qualifications for priests. Leviticus 21 states that no priest with a mum, a physical blemish or defect, may serve at the altar. This list is extensive: blindness, lameness, disfigurement, limb differences, even broken bones. To our ears, this might sound discriminatory or unjust, but in the cultural and religious context of the ancient Near East, the priest was meant to represent the ideal order of creation. The sanctuary was a microcosm of heaven on earth, and those who served there symbolized that wholeness. The requirement for physical wholeness was not a value judgment on the worth of individuals, but a ritual symbol. Even more significantly, the text makes clear that priests with a mum are not excluded from the community. They are not dismissed or shamed. They may not officiate sacrifices, but they are still entitled to eat the holy food and live within the priestly household. This is a vital point. The Holiness Code draws boundaries for sacred service, but it simultaneously affirms inclusion and dignity. The Mishnah, particularly in the Tritractate Megillah 24b, reflects this tension. There, the rabbis debate whether certain priests can perform public blessings if their appearance might distract the congregation. Yet even in these discussions, the priest's value and status are affirmed. This balance between symbolic boundaries and real inclusion challenges modern readers to think about how communities can uphold sacred values without dehumanizing those who do not meet specific ritual criteria. Leviticus 22 continues by extending the discussion of the holiness from the priests themselves to the offerings and the sacred food they may eat. The Hebrew verb qadash, to be holy or set apart, reoccurs throughout the chapter. Holiness is not abstract. It is physical, rational, and regulated. A priest may not eat the holy food if he is in a state of impurity, if he has touched a corpse or suffered an emission or has a skin disease. Once again, this is not about sin, but about states of being that symbolize disruption of life or boundary. The holiness extends to the priest's household. Family members, dependents, and servants may share in the sacred food, but outsiders may not. The concept of holiness here operates like a spiritual perimeter, and food becomes a liturgical act. The table of the priest, like the altar itself, is a place where divine and human realities meet. Eating is never just eating in Leviticus. It is participation in a sacred order. The rules for sacrifice also emphasize wholeness. Just as the priest must be physically whole, so too must the animals offered. An offering with a blemish, a mum, is not acceptable for fulfilling a vow, though it might be given as a free will offering. This is another case where the system shows nuance. Obligations must be fulfilled with the best and the most whole. Voluntary acts of generosity are still welcomed, even when they fall short of the ideal. Scholars like Ross K. Nichols point out that this reflects a broader biblical principle. God honors both obligation and intention. What matters is not just the letter of the law, but the heart behind the gift. Throughout these chapters, a divine refrain echoes again and again. Ani Adonai Makedesh Shenkem Ani Yehovah Mekadeshkem. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. This is the theological heart of Leviticus. Holiness is not something humans achieve or fabricate. It is a divine act, a gift that God bestows, and a reality that humans respond to. The priest does not make himself holy. He is made holy by God's calling, and his role is to reflect that sanctity through ritual faithfulness. Scholars like Elaine Pagels have described Leviticus not as moralistic, but as cosmic. It portrays a vision of the world where every aspect of life, birth and death, food and sex, body and community, is part of a sacred order. George Nicholsberg and Lawrence Struckenbrook note that this vision had a long afterlife. At Qumran, the sectarian community that produced the Dead Sea Scrolls saw Leviticus as a constitution for their own way of life. The priest's holiness became the ideal for the entire group. This is critical. What begins in Leviticus as a set of regulations for a specific class eventually becomes a spiritual aspiration for all. Christian texts absorbed and transformed these themes as well. The Epistle of the Hebrews reimagines Jesus as the ultimate high priest, one who enters not the earthly sanctuary, but the heavenly one, and who offers not animal sacrifices, but his own life. The priesthood becomes universalized. Paul in Romans 12 urges believers to present their bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God. This is the same Levitical logic. Body, action, and intention all matter, but reframed through the lens of grace. Stylistically, Leviticus 21 and 22 use repetition and pattern to form memory. Quote, without blemish and quote, I am the Lord are drum beats throughout. The structure builds outward from the individual body of the priest to his family, to his service at the altar, to the community's offerings. Each layer reinforces the one before. This is pedagogy through rhythm, theology taught through repetition. Today, reading these chapters, we must acknowledge the cultural gap. In a modern context, we value inclusion, diversity, and dignity of everybody. And rightly so. The challenge is to interpret Leviticus without flattening it. These texts are not medical manuals or moral symbolic systems that communicated meaning in their own time. To honor them is not to adopt their rules uncritically, but to ask what wisdom they offer. Perhaps we learn that sacredness requires boundaries. Perhaps we are reminded that holiness is both a gift and a responsibility. And perhaps we see that perfection in Leviticus was never about superiority, but about pointing toward a God who is wholly other and wholly good. For Jews, after the destruction of the Second Temple, these priestly laws took on new meaning. With no altar, no sanctuary, no holiness once reserved for priesthood became a calling for every Jew. The home became a temple, the table an altar, the parents priests. For Christians, the same dispersion of holiness occurred. The church was called to be a holy nation, the royal priesthood. In both traditions, Leviticus remains not a relic, but a foundation. And so, as we let Leviticus 21 and 22 speak to us, we hear not a call to exclusion, but to attentiveness. Holiness is lived out in boundaries, in reverence and compassion. These texts invite us to honor God not only in the extraordinary, but in the everyday, to see the sacred in the body, in the home, in the meal, in the offering. Holiness begins in God. It is not earned. It is received, and it reshapes everything. Well, thank you for joining me today in this study. If this speaks to you, leave a note or share it with a friend. And we will see you in the next chapter soon.